Victor, I've spoken to you about creativity several times before, and we've talked about how creativity has different meanings, based on the context that we're talking about. So today, if we think about the business environment, what does creativity and innovation mean to you, particularly in the business environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I was reflecting on it yesterday. I really think it's the lifeblood of any organization or any kind of business, because without creativity and innovation and a little bit of disruption thrown in this as well, you can't really move forward. There's no sustainability because you end up being a little bit stale, I guess. And without driving creativity and innovation in an organization, then it's going to be difficult to drive forward with fresh ideas. And therefore, how do you create new products that are going to disrupt the market if you're not focusing on creativity within teams, within departments, within the whole organization, really?
Okay, so how do you create situations? How do you create environments where it's fertile ground, I suppose, for creativity and innovation?
Yeah, I tend to. So, for example, if you look back at my corporate career as a leader, I made sure that I built trust, and you need a bit of patience with this, so you need a bit of time. So I built trust within the teams that I managed. And then within that trust, once I realized that people had the guard down and they were more relaxed and willing to listen to what I was saying, I would then allow them to fail, and fail often. And I know it sounds a bit cliched and a lot of people say this, but you really need to give people room to fail, because within that failure, there's many iterations of products, etc., that don't get to market, but there's a hell of a lot of good learning in there. So that's kind of the approach I've always taken. But if, for example, someone fails, I also give them feedback in a timely manner as well, and make sure that we learn from any of these failures going forward, because that's really crucial. Because just allowing someone to fail and not having the autonomy or the structure or framework in there to give them feedback and then nurture and help them grow after that, then it doesn't work either, I guess.
I suppose we have to define failure, because some failures can destroy a business, can destroy an organization, can lead to people being made redundant because clients have been lost due to the failure of one individual. So it depends on how much risk an organization can afford to take when we're talking about failures, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a good angle. I mean, obviously that does have to be taken into consideration, but in my 20 years experience as a corporate leader, the kind of failures that I was exposed to myself through, making my own mistakes and also allowing a bit of breathing space for my actual teams, it never really damaged the business. In fact, it even strengthened it in a certain way. And I think it's a simple misunderstanding within organizations. They're really fearful around creativity and allowing people to innovate. But yeah, you're right. Obviously, you can't fail with everything, because then after a certain amount of time, it would start to eat and bite into the profit, I'm guessing, or the top line of the company. Yes. But again, it's just to be clear, if someone fails, I was always quick to say, look, what did you learn from that? What can we learn going forward when we try this again? Because that's the crucial bit that I see a lot of companies not really taking forward. They might say that they allow people to fail, but I don't see that feedback being given. And I don't see people taking ownership then to drive forward with the new iteration of whatever that product might look like.
I suppose in a way you have to trust the person to add more value than the risks that you're taking in allowing them to fail, so that you trust that in the long run, they're going to, even though they have failed in the short run, in the long term, they're going to be compensating for what they've lost.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And the thing is, I mean, again, in my experience, I've had people have to leave the team because they kept failing at the wrong thing, or they didn't really take responsibility, for the job that they were meant to do. So as a leader, you do have to make some tough decisions sometimes and make some changes. But I was always willing to do that. And again, if someone just failed, but they were very good at the job, for me, it was more a confidence building thing. To build trust, you need to allow people enough breathing space to be able to see that making a couple of mistakes, although it can be tricky, and then you think, oh God, what am I going to do? But if you see your boss, your leader saying, look, I've got your back, you know, okay, it wasn't cool, we didn't really move forward, but what did you learn from that? And next time you do the same thing, what can you get right? And if you do that, and then you build trust over time, then you end up with a high performing team. And actually, that's where disruption and creativity can really grow pretty well.
Right. Yeah, so I suppose there's a certain period of time where the person would need to have proven themselves. So once they've proven themselves, then you can allow, you know, some failure. Whereas if you know, had a new employee and they started off by failing, you know, and failing and failing and failing,
Yeah.
and built up that level of trust, then you'd probably have to let them go.
Yeah, I mean, again, in my experience, it's been rare that I've had to let someone go because of that, you know, if to be that extreme. But it can happen, yeah. In in most of the cases, I've been able to nurture through feedback and coaching, and been able to allow that person to grow, and then they become stronger. And in fact, usually by being given a little bit of space, they get more creative, and then they start to drive innovation themselves. And actually, any good leader, you know, in terms of how you manage them, I tend not to do any kind of micromanagement. So again, it takes patience, it takes a lot of trust, and again, it takes, you know, some of experience, because it took me a good few years to, you know, find a way forward, because it, you know, it can be quite tricky, you know, to allow a whole team that kind of breathing space. As you say, given them too much space, the wheels can come off, and you know, you can end up with a bit of a mess. But it is possible, and again, with the right kind of nurturing and feedback, and it's simple things like, you know, allowing them off-sites, for example, on a monthly or quarterly basis to drive innovation, and just locking the team in the room and just getting playful and saying, right, what can we do to remove some of these problems, or what are the pain points in growing some of these products? Or, for example, from a change perspective, any good organization has a lot of growing pains, you know, by going through change. Change is actually a good thing. But I noticed through my corporate career that companies just change things for the sake of it without knowing the why and the how. And then that ended up being a bit of a disruptive environment in a negative sense, because the team or the employees didn't really understand why they were doing what they were doing, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Right. So you talked about disruption a few times. So in your experience in the corporate world, what has been the impact of disruptive technologies? Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, many. I guess I've grown through many technological changes, because I've been working as a leader since the, I guess, mid to late 90s. One really good example, I used to have quite a challenging role in the UAE, in Dubai. And one of my first gigs as a change manager, as someone who was driving change within a particular part of the organization, I was given a task of bringing in a digital system. So, for example, the company was paying a lot of money to pay for dead rent, and they had a lot of files where they had lots of paperwork because it was contract based. My job was to bring in a system where it digitized all of that paperwork. And just to be clear, some of the problems with the old system was, you know, losing paperwork and having to employ people to go and file stuff. And so, in short, this system allowed us to actually scan and ingest all of this information. And it was a challenge, because some people were actually wanting to hold on to the old ways. Like any changes, there's always employees that will fight you to the death, you know, not to be able to accept the change. So all I did, which was quite simple, I took a good demographic of the front and back office. So there was cheerleaders who were very positive towards anything the company did. And on the offside of that, on the flip side, I took some people who were quite negative, and also not so much negative, but people that were very, I know, a little bit fearful around some of these things. And what we did, we showed them the first iteration of the system, like a prototype, and we showed them exactly what it was going to do process-wise. So we took them from a simple process of what happens right now with all the problems and losing paperwork and the cost of having to pay dead rent versus do the same thing, but scan an actual piece of paper into a system. And it blew their minds because they realized that they could save not only time and all of the hassle of losing documentation, which costs money, but also after about 6 months to a year, we removed a lot of office space because all of the paperwork was now virtual and, it had been digitized. So it was a massive game changer, something that simple. But I'm not going to lie, it was also a challenge because like any change, like I said, there's always people within the structure that will fight you to the death because they just believe that the old way, and it's comfortable, people like to stick to the old ways, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, there is always a payoff between the comfort
Yeah.
of the systems that exist, and not everyone likes to feel that discomfort that is associated with change and with innovation.
Yeah, and as a leader of change in these companies, I always had to remind myself that me too sometimes, in all aspects of our lives, there's areas where I am resistant to change as well. So if you have that in the back of your mind when you approach, a demographic and say, right, we need to do something, if you get the how and the why right, and again, if you pick the right kind of people and start from the grassroots, from the ground up, then it's usually a lot easier to implement that kind of change.
Yeah. So, Peter, in the organization, we often come across lots and lots of different ideas, but not all the ideas are equally valuable for our organization. So how do what systems and processes do you use to establish the value of ideas?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it can be tricky. I mean, the old traditional way, which I still use, just to be clear, would be to build a rock solid business case. But again, what is rock solid? My idea of rock solid compared to the people I'm pitching it to, there might be, differences of opinion. So it's having that wiggle room and flexibility in any business case, knowing that there's going to be some people, i.e. stakeholders, that might not be comfortable with it. So in many, for example, new products that I helped develop or new changes that we were going to implement, we had to convince the powers that be, my bosses, other key stakeholders within the organization, that these things were going to be useful. But I'm not going to lie, it was always a challenge because even with the best business case, we get a green light and then we go to certain key stakeholders and then we find resistance straight away. I think a good thing for any leader to develop is also the network that you have within your organization, because this saved me many times as a leader because I'd already put the groundwork in, getting to know people and building trust with certain key stakeholders. And this saved my life many times when I had to roll out changes or bring in a new creative solution. And sometimes, business case aside, you just have to convince people without the, I guess, the rock solid financial proof that it's going to improve, a certain area of the business. Sometimes things that are disruptive cannot be proven up front, if that makes sense. Because if you look at certain business structures like Airbnb, they came out of nowhere. The people that founded these type of companies, that they can tell you in hindsight after the fact that they had this idea and it seems really clear. But a lot of these disruptive technologies, it's really difficult to prove that they're going to work in the future, right?
Yes, like Airbnb, like Uber, maybe
Yeah.
they filled a vacuum that was growing. There was a growing vacuum, and so basically they saw the opportunity, and but it didn't happen overnight, and there was a lot of investment that went into it, and not everyone has the resources to invest in their ideas like these people obviously did. They had the support structures in place.
Yeah, behind all of these success stories, there's always a support structure and the funding's there and this, that, and the other. But there's also a massive dollar per look with any innovation and creativity. Yeah, it's just having or taking an opportunity with just embracing the fact that it could fail. So there is a little bit of risk involved. And I guess in some of these industries, there was a hell of a lot of risk. So it was kudos to some of the people that were, you know, funding these projects, because there wasn't really a clear way forward that it would actually generate profit, you know, in the future. And look at some of the startups. I mean, I'm in Berlin, and there's many startup companies here where they're taking massive risks, not really knowing in 6 months to a year or 2 years whether this product is going to even hit the market, you know.
Yeah, because we only hear about those that succeed. You know, for every one that succeeds, there's probably thousands that didn't. You know, that was similar, but they didn't succeed, and we don't know about them.
Yeah, and this is the tricky thing. I mean, it's difficult if you're starting out and, you know, coming up with innovative products. Then it's really difficult to see a lot of the stories, you know, both positive and negative, because like you say, it's only the success stories where we've got lots of data and information about. But some of these iterations of, you know, there's many companies that don't see light of day, but that's not to say that they're not good ideas. A lot of the times, for example, I've seen products where I'm thinking, wow, that's next level, it's going to change the world. But again, if society's not quite ready for that particular product, it might not see light of day for another 100 years. I mean, there's many examples of that, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You know, so many people who are creative and innovative, they are ahead of their time. So they, you know, their ideas might not, as you say, see the light of day until long after they're gone, because society isn't ready for them.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations, they have, they try to create a culture of continuous improvement to generate
Mm.
creativity. So in your experience, you know, how can we foster this culture of continuous improvement?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In the organizations that I work for, it's been tricky because they've all wanted to do that and drive that kind of mindset forward. But in some of the organizations I work for, it just didn't work because I guess the vision and mission needs to be really clear. And everyone in the organization needs to understand why, you know, the company's doing what they're doing. And I think in terms of implementation, the communication piece is really important. And it's also creating a culture where people are curious about driving change forward and being creative. Because I see a lot of companies talking about it, but again, the tangible action behind it is sometimes lacking, you know. So in terms of implementation, which I've done for many years and, you know, been a change manager, I guess you've got to create a space for employees to come up with their own ideas, but not just do that. You've also got to take them forward. So if an employee comes to you with a hell of an idea and you can drive it forward, then it's checking in with them and communicating clearly what can be done and what can't be done. And I've also seen it fail in terms of, you know, disengaging employees because we haven't gone back and fed back when things can't be taken forward. So for example, every idea, as far as I'm concerned, I'm really appreciative when employees send them to me. And I always follow up and make sure that if it can't be implemented, why? Was it the business case had flaws in it? Is it just not the right time? Or in terms of the company and where we're going in terms of the vision and mission, it just isn't congruent with that. And it's not something that can be taken forward. But again, it's opening up and saying to the person, look, thank you for your idea. That's amazing. However, it can't be done right now, but please keep it coming. And I've seen many organizations fail with these initiatives because they just get overwhelmed with ideas and they don't invest enough time and money. And it could be as simple as, it's not even a money thing. It could be just, you know, giving a few employees responsibility of running these particular initiatives and making sure that they're successful. And it's usually simple steps that are missing, really, that I've seen, or at least from my humble experience anyway.
Yeah, and maybe those ideas are not good for that organization, but they might be great for another organization. So
Yeah, but it's just getting people curious, I guess, and getting them excited about innovation and creativity. Again, probably repeating myself, but I see companies just fearful of the word creativity. And even for me, you know, with my company, I've had to really repackage how I deliver, you know, my solutions. So usually it's using words like we've used, like innovation and disruption, where it seems to be decision makers and people in these organizations seem a lot comfortable with these words, simply because they can connect it, I guess, to more tangible things like driving results and the top line. So therefore, if someone becomes more innovative and, I guess, comes up with disruptive products, then therefore we can all agree that that should lead to profitability and, something that I know you're really passionate about, sustainability. Because all of these things are great, but if they're not nurtured and there's a structure around them, then the sustainability part, there's flaws in that, right?
Yeah. I find that in the business environment, it's much easier to use the word innovation rather than creativity, because innovation is commercial, whereas creativity can be kind of like, wild, artistic, and not, as you say, congruent with the vision of the organization.
Yeah, but the thing is, what I've noticed as well, again, I've been interviewing quite a few people of late myself about creativity in organizations, and I've spoken to some C-level people of late, and they seem to be doing creative initiatives inside the company, which is, again, against what we've just said, right? So it actually warms my heart a bit that people are allowing their employees to get creative, but they're not attaching it to KPIs or the vision or mission. But funny enough, that does actually drive innovation, because the more employees explore their own creativity, even on a personal level, I'm pretty sure, I'd hazard a guess, that probably drives engagement as well. I think that's the tricky bit, that we all get sucked in as leaders to everything we do has to be tangible. It has to drive forward with the mission, and et cetera, et cetera. But what I've noticed of late is the next level of leaders, the more creative they get, the better results they seem to be able to deliver, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because when they're allowing themselves to be creative, they are usually more responsive to what's going on around them.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, Peter, that you'd like to add?
I don't know, really. I think we've touched on many things there. Just, the word creativity, it covers many topics, right? And obviously, you mentioned it there, you hit the nail on the head. Most people think of art, right? And then they think of chaos, and there can't be a structure around it, and this, that, and the other. But again, just to explore that topic, because the more you open up to your creative side as a human, again, the more productive you can be. And that's something that I explored, throughout my 20-year corporate career. And that's something I'm passionate about now, because what I'm doing with my own business is really helping the next level, or the future leaders, to get more creative. Yeah.
Yes, I find that when creativity is associated with productivity, then yes, obviously it's a positive connotation, isn't it? But very often creativity is associated with laziness,
No, you make a valid point, because it has to be connected to something tangible, let's be honest, because if it's in a business context, just using the word creativity, totally agree, it opens up too many questions, and there should be as well. People should be challenging in each other, and that's another thing. I'm very open to that, and that's something I nurture or support in terms of the workshops that I deliver, because you must be able to challenge and question stuff. But also, if you're going to get creative, how do you attach that to what the company's doing? It can be easily attached to the results and driving top line and making the company more profitable. So that's why I just think leaders shouldn't be so scared of that particular topic, because that's where all of the insights are going to come from, all of the new products and fresh thinking around some of the next, the future problems that any organization is going to face. And also, one other last thing, in terms of creativity and innovation, sometimes when you're problem solving, you're trying to use the cognitive part of your brain. And actually, the more curious and creative you get, and you go into that space of flow or just being curious, you actually end up being able to resolve problems a lot easier, because you're not stuck in a loop of, looking at the problem and focusing on it. And usually, like anything, if you want the answers, usually it's quite annoying, because you only get it when you're not thinking about it, right? You could end up with fresh thinking when you're in the shower, when you're going, for a run, or you're in the gym.
Yeah.
Or crucially, you're in a brainstorming session and you're all getting stressed about coming up with a solution. And then a day later, you're on a lunch break, and then it hits you. There's the answer.
Yeah, because you're allowing the subconscious to do the problem solving for you, and then.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Peter, I've really enjoyed my conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.